Why Isaac Newton did his best thinking alone. In the summer of 1665, Cambridge University closed its gates. The plague had reached England again, spreading through London and into the surrounding counties. Students were sent home, lectures were suspended, and a 22-year-old Isaac Newton returned to the farmhouse in Woolsthorpe, where he had been born. He would remain there, largely alone, for the better part of 2 years. No letters survive from this period that suggest he was troubled by the solitude. No diary entries record frustration or loneliness. What the records do show in notebooks that would remain private for decades is that Newton was working, quietly, obsessively, and entirely by himself. What emerged from that silence would eventually reshape mathematics, physics, and the philosophy of nature itself. But this is not a story about genius. It is a story about conditions, about what certain kinds of thought require and what they cost. It would be easy to romanticize Newton's isolation, to treat it as a choice made by a brilliant mind seeking clarity. But the evidence suggests something more complicated. Newton did not retreat from the world because he found solitude peaceful. He retreated because he could not function otherwise. From an early age, he struggled with ordinary social exchange. His notebooks from grammar school show a boy who kept meticulous records of his own sins, small resentments, minor cruelties, a tendency toward secrecy he could not seem to correct. He had few friends. He formed no lasting attachments. When he arrived at Cambridge as an undergraduate, he was assigned a roommate and barely spoke to him. This was not preference, it was constitution. Newton required silence the way other people require company. His mind could not settle in the presence of distraction. Conversation pulled him away from the long chains of reasoning he was learning to construct, and so he withdrew not to find himself, but to escape the interruptions that made sustained thought impossible. What distinguished Newton from other solitary thinkers was the ferocity with which he guarded his work. He developed the mathematical techniques we now call calculus in the mid-1660s. He told almost no one. When he finally described his methods in letters to Leibniz more than a decade later, he did so in cipher. He was not interested in sharing credit. He was not interested in collaboration. He wanted to hold the knowledge close, to control it entirely. This secrecy extended to nearly everything he produced. His work on optics remained unpublished for years. His early gravitational calculations stayed in notebooks. When Edmund Halley finally persuaded him to write the Principia Mathematica in the 1682, Newton did so in a state of near total withdrawal, barely eating, rarely leaving his rooms, producing one of the most important scientific texts in history in a kind of controlled frenzy. He later said, in one of his rare reflective moments, that he had seen further than others because he stood on the shoulders of giants. But his private behavior suggested a different instinct. Trust no one, share nothing, work alone. The period from 1665 to 1667 is sometimes called Newton's Annus Mirabilis, his miracle year. But it was not a year, it was 18 months, and there was nothing miraculous about it. What happened at Woolsthorpe was the result of time, silence, and obsessive focus. Alone in the farmhouse, with no academic obligations and no one to account to, Newton began working through problems that had occupied him at Cambridge. He developed his method of fluxions. He experimented with prisms and light. He began thinking seriously about the mathematics of motion and attraction. None of this was public. None of it was discussed with colleagues. The notebooks from this period are dense, technical, and utterly solitary. Newton was not bouncing ideas off collaborators. He was not refining his thinking through debate. He was sitting alone, working through problems that required months of uninterrupted attention. This is not how we imagine discovery. We imagine dialogue, exchange, sudden insight. But Newton's breakthroughs came from something slower and more private. the sustained pressure of a single mind on a single problem over months and years in silence. It would be dishonest to describe Newton's solitude without describing what it took from him. He was, by all accounts, a difficult man, suspicious, resentful, quick to perceive slights. His conflicts with Robert Hooke over optics and with Leibniz over calculus consumed years of his life and revealed a capacity for pettiness that bordered on obsession. He did not merely disagree with his rivals, he sought to destroy them. In 1693, Newton suffered what appears to have been a nervous breakdown. He accused friends of conspiring against him. He withdrew from correspondence. He wrote strange, incoherent letters. The cause remains unclear. Some historians suspect mercury poisoning from his alchemical experiments, but the episode revealed a mind that had been under strain for a very long time. Newton died wealthy and celebrated, but largely alone. He never married. He formed no deep personal bonds. The solitude that made his work possible also sealed him off from the ordinary consolations of human life. Today, we speak of collaboration as though it were a universal good. We design open offices, we schedule brainstorming sessions, we build networks and celebrate connection. The assumption is that thinking improves when it is shared. For some kinds of work, this is true. But Newton's example suggests a limit. Certain problems cannot be solved quickly. They cannot be broken into pieces and distributed among a team. They require a single mind to hold the entire structure at once, for months or years, without interruption. This is not efficient. It is not scalable. It does not translate well into workflows or productivity systems. But it is, for certain kinds of thought, necessary. We have built a culture that makes such thinking increasingly difficult. Constant communication, immediate feedback, the expectation that ideas should be shared before they are finished. Newton could not have worked this way. It is worth asking whether anyone still can. I want to be careful here. This is not an argument for solitude as a virtue. It is not advice. Newton's isolation was not a strategy. It was a condition, something his mind required and his temperament enforced. He did not choose it the way one might choose a method. He endured it because he could not function otherwise. What his example offers is not a model, but a question: whether the kind of thought that reshaped our understanding of the physical world is still possible in a culture that has made sustained solitude almost unattainable. Newton sat alone in a farmhouse during a plague, working on problems no one else could see. He emerged with the foundations of modern physics. We are unlikely to produce another Newton, but we might at least notice what made his work possible and what we have quietly made impossible since.